I'm joined by two very special guests today, who I will introduce. Firstly, we have Brendan Hopper joining us, General Manager, Cybersecurity and Applied Research Centre, CBA. Brendan, please come and join me here on stage. And we're also joined by Ellie Warner from my second favourite city in the world, which is Singapore. And I think Sydney is one of her favourites as well. So maybe at some stage in the next year or so, we'll both get to our favourite cities. But welcome, Ellie, as well, joining us there live from sunny Singapore. Now, just to introduce our two guests a little bit more, Ellie is the Global Head of Training and Awareness at Standard Chartered Bank Singapore, where she's led their information and cybersecurity training, awareness and exercise agenda since January 2015. So obviously a key area of focus for many of us here today based on what we've been discussing during this morning's proceedings. Now, Brendan is the General Manager of the Commonwealth Bank Cyber Security Centre, which works around the clock to actively defend customers and vital bank infrastructure from cyber threats. So a great sort of, I think, pair for me to join together with on the panel here today. We've got about 30 minutes. I'd love to get straight into it, Ellie and Brendan, if I can. And maybe, Ellie, if I can start with you. Firstly, welcome from Singapore, of course, and it's good to see you again. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role? You know, the audience here, the team has told us that awareness, training, education is a real sort of key focus area for them, and at the same time, something of a challenge. But if you think about the pandemic, reflecting back over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, as you think about explaining your role, what has that really meant to you, if you like? I mean, are there one or two sort of enduring things which kind of stand out for you as you contemplate this as it relates to your role?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And it's great to be back, albeit virtually. I've got to say, I've got a little bit of FOMO seeing you all in a room together. I don't think I've seen a group size larger than 5 people in 8 months. So it's fantastic to see you having a live event. And I just wish I could be there in person, but it's great to be back. So thank you for the invite. So as you mentioned, I'm based here in Singapore. I have a global role. My portfolio looks at information cybersecurity, data and privacy, resilience, and third party across training and awareness. So essentially responsible and accountable for 100,000 plus employees and all of our third parties in terms of how we protect our customers' data, whether you're a board member, whether you are somebody with privileged access to systems, whether you're somebody working in our physical branches, we still do have those, and or whether you're somebody coding and how to do that securely. So that's my responsibility, and also extending that to data and privacy and third parties as well. Look, I think the pandemic has meant a lot of things to all of us, hasn't it? And it's been just a horrendous year on so many levels, and how it's impacted lives and livelihoods. Difficult to draw any positives, really. But what I would say we've learned, the two things that really stand out, I'm going to start with the positive. You know me, Matt,
yeah.
Glassball kind of person, is we tend to, in our cyber functions, because we are risk managers, we tend to look at humans as in negative terms. You know, we call them repeat offenders, we call them weakest links, we call them dumb insiders. This kind of negative rhetoric we tend to use with humans. And look, I think it's on us as security professionals to look back over the last 8-9 months and acknowledge that actually humans have done a pretty darn good job, right? We've shown we can be extremely resilient. We can show we can adapt. We can send emails securely. We don't necessarily respond or give in to those people purporting to be health officials on the phone. All of those COVID-relating phishing attacks, we haven't yielded to. We're still logging on remotely using VPN. We've shown we can be pretty responsible. So I think as all the CISOs in the room and all the security professionals, it's on us to acknowledge that and maybe shift the rhetoric a little bit from these pesky humans to actually, you know what, they're pretty darn good and we can trust them, and we should probably try and foster a culture of empowerment rather than this kind of culture of fear and compliance that we tend to draw to. Second big learning for me is we just got to pivot our whole program, haven't we? We're used to physical events, roadshows, posters in the office, videos in the canteens, phishing lunch and learn clinics. Can't do any of that anymore. We've had to completely pivot, as I'm sure most of you in the room have, our whole go-to-market, if you like. And I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, aren't we, Matt? So yeah, those are two big ones for me.
Exactly, thanks. Thank you very much, Ellie. Brendan, what about from your point of view? A little bit more about your role, but then also, building on from what Ellie was talking about, maybe a couple of standout things for you as you think about the last sort of 8 to 9 months in your role. Yeah.
Sure, thanks, Matt. Am I on mic?
Yep, all good.
So I've actually had a title change. I look after Commonwealth Bank's cyber protective controls, so making sure we properly protect the group's assets from cyber attack. Also our testing controls and secure coding to make sure that what we develop is known to be secure, and also our education programs, so both internal awareness, but also our partnerships out in the industry, trying to make sure that Australia has enough cyber skills to go around. I think I've seen a lot of the same themes that Ellie's seen, and I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. I think some builds from me would really be, I think we've got a great opportunity at the moment, and I've kind of seen a little bit of capacity freeing up in cyber's leaders' calendars as a result of COVID, which is actually a little bit maybe paradoxical, but people seem to have more time right now to actually collaborate and work as a community. A little bit less focus inside in their organisations, a lot more going out there and asking, what are you doing about this threat? What are you doing for remote working? What are you doing about this technology? And I think that network of cyber leaders and defenders has actually been a real positive out of the situation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brendan. And it's interesting, like many conversations we're having, here today at CIO event a couple of weeks ago, and many of these workshops that I've been running, it's consistently coming back to the people, our employees. Are we looking after them, their well-being? Are they being productive? How are we making sure they're not burning out? That sort of thing. And our research at ADAPT shows that, as I mentioned earlier, over 40% of workforces will remain remote to one degree or another as we sort of move out of this hard sort of lockdown environments that we find ourselves on. So I'd love to get a sense of, how can we, I think, not only enable, but also sort of drive a more aligned cyber culture within our organisations. I think particularly as we consider these sort of hybrid environments that we find ourselves in, we're going to have some people at home, some in the office, some people won't know where they are, but how do we make sure they have much more of an aligned culture when they're in very different sort of environments? Typically, from a culture point of view, which did come up as one of the major sort of roadblocks for many of the delegates here today. Bren, I don't know if you want to start with that one. How do we drive the right culture in these kind of remote environments? Does it need to change? Is it good enough now?
I don't think it is good enough now. I think it's getting better. And I think that what I'm sort of seeing is organisations who are doing kind of well in this situation are using the data that's been made available to them kind of by the shift in working, the extra visibility from some of the remote working solutions, but also just sort of using the event as a good avenue to just put those gentle, frequent reminders in place to gently nudge people towards the right culture and attitude towards cybersecurity, kind of in a more positive light. And I think that the right way to approach this is to lots of little messages and signalling and nudges in the right direction, rather than your kind of like once a year mandatory learning train work that people really don't pay attention to. I think the last point I've heard recently that was really interesting was that an organisation I was talking to, they had almost minimal adoption, or everyone was doing their mandatory learning, but no one was learning from it until they added some value-add things like how do you keep your kids safe on Facebook, and kind of interleaved them into the training. And what they actually found was people were paying attention to the mandatory things because they wanted to pick up all that the information that's actually personally useful to them.
Yeah, so how we deliver that information, but also I think to your point, and I mentioned this earlier on, that generally we're not doing many organisational wide sort of awareness programs within our organisations, not on a very regular basis, but I think to your point, it's much more important maybe to kind of break those down into smaller chunks, make them relevant to constituents rather than organisationally wide, for example. Ellie, love to bring you in now. You're obviously part of a global organisation. I mean, culture is very different, obviously, in different parts of the world, right? So when we think about cybersecurity in these hybrid environments, different geographies, what's your kind of views on, I guess, how culture needs to evolve as our working lives are evolving as well in this environment?
I love this question. I think, and look, Matt, you and I both originally from the UK, probably been outside of the UK longer than we've been in it, travelled and worked all over the globe, right? And just like cultures are different, risks are different in every country. Everyone's got different roles, and even pre-COVID, right? It was already complex enough having this kind of perfect marriage of global blueprints around our policies and standards and controls, and then marrying that with local requirements. And then on top of that, how do we get audience driven? So we're looking at a number of things. One is very pivoting from general to targeted, and Brendan's already referred to that. We built out our targeted awareness function in my team as well, looking very specifically at high-risk roles or people that require extra help as well. Brendan already mentioned nudges. I like that word. People don't learn from asynchronous learning. They don't learn from a 30-minute mandatory e-learning. We know that. That's not how people learn. So we're looking at different taxonomies now and ways in which people do learn. We've launched a whole series of practical labs, virtually, of course. We're also looking at just making it much more personal. And I like what Brendan was saying earlier about if you just make it as personal as possible, which of course COVID has forced us to. We're running sessions we had a session earlier this year on how to set up a home network securely rather than having all your kids running off your various devices as well. So there's a number of different ways in which we've had to adapt and just make it a lot more engaging, setting up sessions, getting people in part of the conversation rather than this kind of old school asynchronous one size fits all. It's just not fit for purpose, is it? And I'm loving some vendors out there. They're doing some really interesting stuff around. If there's anyone in the room that's exploring this, please connect with me on LinkedIn, looking at sort of behavioral analytics. So you're getting heat maps of where the behavior gaps are. So if you've got one business function where people are more prone to data leakage, how do you serve up targeted real-time learning interventions for those audiences rather than your quarterly campaigns that frankly might not even be hitting the mark? So yeah, it's a whole ream of things we need to be doing differently and already are doing differently. So yeah.
Okay. That's great. I'd love to move over a little bit now to this sort of concept of security as a competitive differentiator. And I conducted a number of roundtables in person before this pandemic kicked in. And there's a real hunger, I think, within the finance industry particularly, which you're both from, I think, to learn from each other and collaborate and make sure that we can sort of, I think, really address sort of best practices together, even in competitive situations. So how can we leverage, benefits and advantage, if you like, from security as a competitive sort of differentiating play without necessarily, risking, I guess, too much of our own sort of IP and so on from an organisational point of view? Is there a balance between collaboration and sharing and kind of leaving ourselves potentially open to competitive challenges? Brendan, any thoughts on that one?
It's something I think a lot about, and I've spent some time with some of our customers over the past couple of days, and I've really been thinking that when you walk into the board or an executive meeting, you're really there to explain as a cyber manager what you're doing to manage the risk to your organization, how you're managing the risk of all the things that cyber can cause that can go wrong. But actually, when I think about it as a cyber leader, what we need to do together is really set audacious goals and things like make cybercrime and running a cybercrime enterprise more expensive, so it's just no longer cost effective for the criminals. And I actually think that the way we're going to get there, it's not through risk management, it's through innovation, collaboration. And if you look at how cyber criminal organizations run, their incentives are structured perfectly. They don't get paid unless they actually take money. They don't get paid unless they win. They're not regulated. They're already outside of the law. So there's nothing actually stopping them from innovating and collaborating. And I think a lot of the things we put in place, a lot of our internal risk frameworks that are designed to prevent IP, in the cyberspace right now are probably preventing us from collaborating and working together as much as we can to set those really big goals of making Australia such a hard target for cyber criminals that it's just not cost effective to operate here. And obviously that's a very long journey to go on. But I think it does come back to that. You need to be doing a good job of your risk management, but I think you also need to dedicate some capacity if you're a large organisation to that collaboration and competition side of things.
But I think also, it's one thing sort of collaborating externally, but until we drive greater sort of awareness and openness internally, can we even begin to sort of have those sort of external engagements? Ellie, I can see you nodding your head there. I'd love to get some thoughts from you on that one. Yeah.
Oh, look, totally. And look, none of us forget, our customers and our employees have a choice. They don't have to be with us, right? They choose to come to our work. They choose to work for us, and our customers choose to bank or buy products or services from us. So you're absolutely right, Matt. We've got both kind of an internal PR job to do as well as an external one. And if you think, look, the reason we're all good at our jobs is because we are risk averse. We are a risk and control function. That's what we do. And we use all these kind of framework and jargon when we go and meet with the board and the business. And it's no wonder that we kind of leave them looking a little bit blank, because we're not actually talking about how we're enabling them to run their businesses safely and securely. I mean, operational resilience, how is that not a business enabler? Business continuity when there's a flood or a typhoon or, hey, a global pandemic, how is that not a business enabler? So we've got to start thinking about doing a bit of PR for ourselves. And when we're having internal conversations, and I think Donna and Claudine referred to this, helping them understand about how we're actually enabling them to do business securely. And then externally with customers, I mean, they have a choice to bank with us, right? We've been operating for over 150 years, like a lot of you have in the room. You know, you've got generations of serving customers, but they can move any day they like. So unless we're innovating and unless we're really disrupting things like retail banking, we just launched our first virtual bank, digital bank in Hong Kong, Mox last month, you know, setting up an account in a few minutes. But we also want to service our customers that want to still go into a bank. So you kind of need that blended hybrid approach, don't you? We've got as well, we've got a whole SC Ventures arm in our organization that looks at innovation. And we've got about, I think, 20 plus thousand Innovate members, about 2,000 ideas at the moment in our fintech part of our business. We've got a fintech bridge that helps us connect kind of startups and investors. We're working with an Israeli startup on passwordless, that's what the words that everyone wants to hear, right? Passwordless authentication. So I think if you can balance those conversations without terrifying your stakeholders, saying we're going to do all the protection and the risk control that we do anyway, but why not have that nirvana where we're balancing that with innovation and business enablement? They should be very happy partners rather than mutually exclusive. And I'm sure a lot of the companies in the room are doing this at the moment as well. So again, I'd love to hear about what you're doing, maybe on LinkedIn or separately.
Okay. Brendan, I can see you nodding your head there. I'd love to get some sort of follow-on thoughts from you around that as well. Yeah.
It's sort of hard to follow on because I think I agree with all of it completely.
Okay.
I think that we are in a kind of hard space at the moment where, like across cyber, and I kind of might build on it and change direction a little bit. I think across cyber, we've kind of gone through a transition where we were kind of competing inside our organizations for the past few years to make cyber relevant. I think most boards and executive teams right now really understand that cyber's like one of their big three risks. I think now it's actually a different game we're competing for. I think we're starting to get across like the industry all the budget we need. We actually just can't hire the people and the experts. And I think that lets us actually start thinking very differently about skills shortages and those kind of things. And I think naively, a lot of people think about skills shortages in terms of there's just not enough people with the skills. But I think that the way we need to start thinking about it is, do the people have the right skills themselves? And how do we incrementally improve that? But then also, how do we make sure that people with those skills are sharing them inside of our organizations? But how do we also make sure that we're not just treating cyber as a technology problem and start making it far more of a human problem?
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because as we think about this, making it more of a human problem in general. Elliot, I might bring you back in. For most organisations, every employee, and I'll say from the pavement to the penthouse, really has access, and is responsible for varying levels of customer and corporate data. And I know obviously you're focused very much on education and training. As we think about this, how do we protect ourselves from ourselves, if that makes sense? I know that you've got some thoughts around that in terms of making sure that we're really protecting our assets, but also think about how we're protecting them from our employees as well.
Yeah, look, and that's something that, we're humans, right? So, and COVID, if nothing else, has taught us that one behavior can change from 1 hour to the next. You might be about a great night's sleep, you might be firing on all cylinders, and you recognize that email that comes through, purporting to be from the Ministry of Health, of which we've had a lot in Singapore, certainly you've had that in Australia. You recognize it, you click on your report as phishing button, great, crisis averted, your defense team has all the information they need. There are other times when maybe if you're doing home-based schooling, which a lot of people have been doing this year, or maybe there's distractions in the background, especially working from home, you're human, right? So we have to, going back to what Brendan was saying about constant nudges And it's not just about a compliance and tick box. It's really about, we talk about the mental construct of why people behave securely. And there's a whole kind of what's in it for me, but a lot of it's around the perceived risk. I think some people genuinely, we're very good at telling people what to do without explaining the why. And when I came onto this role, I just said, no more do this, do that. Let's just explain to people, let's treat people like adults and explain why. So when you don't send a password via a different band and you've accidentally sent it to the wrong client, this is what can happen. When you give out information over the phone because they say that they're a member of the travel agency, this is what can happen, and show them the impact of their actions. I think that's one thing we need to do. The other one is just make it as role-based as possible. And we're looking at adaptive learning now. And again, I'd love to hear from you in the room that are looking at this, is serving up the right content at the right time to the right people. So if you've already got a knowledge base here, and you're doing a role that maybe doesn't grant you email access, external email access, well then why would we serve out all those training interventions? So I'd rather serve out training for specific gaps that lead to addressing specific vulnerabilities. And that's where it's quite interesting looking at the stuff around behavioral analytics and heat maps of how our humans are actually behaving. And then we can serve up as a function the right training for the right risks that need to be mitigated, rather than this kind of blanket one size fits all, which is not only inefficient, it's just not addressing the risk.
No, that's a good point. And I think also just kind of thinking about that a little bit more and building on some of the other conversations we've had around culture. We heard from Sean Bowen, the CISO for Restaurant Brands International earlier on, in terms of the need to really think about how we can not necessarily get common approaches, but sort of more consistent cultural approaches to things. Brendan, you teach at UNSW, right? And we spoke about this, that many of your ex-students are now sort of focused on security, or even CISOs in Silicon Valley, where typically, and even Sean admitted this morning, an American himself, that there are sort of very different cultural approaches there compared to Australia. Can you give us a little sense of some of those cultural nuances, if you like?
Yeah, sure, Matt. So I guess I'm starting to see now, and I've had the privilege of teaching cyber at UNSW for 11 years now. So a lot of my first students are now becoming cyber leaders, and they've definitely got a strong preference for startups and Silicon Valley companies. And I think part of that is because security is cyber is very, very different if you build it in right at the start. And I think that these startups, digital companies, digital banks, when they hire their 5th staff member or their 10th staff member, who's also their first cyber person, they're not hiring a CISO, they're hiring a chief engineer or a staff engineer for cybersecurity. And what that means is they're really at the table baking things in, not bolting things on. And it just makes a huge difference. And then I think culturally what that means is there's this whole generation of cyber talent and expertise coming along that isn't used to the top-down risk management and governance approach, and is actually quite put off by it because they're so used to building things in and building things from scratch. And I think, when you've got companies that have one path to production, you've got a single way of doing things and everything's kind of automated and orchestrated, you can live in that nirvana for a while. But then even we're seeing those tech companies actually start to accumulate their own amounts of tech debt and start to look like much older organizations as they grow. And at some point, the two cultures are starting to meet. And it's not necessarily, I think it's a positive thing, but I don't think as an industry, we've actually worked out what the difference is between the effectiveness of bottom-up with the kind of assurance and the satisfaction it gives boards on the top-down approach.
So given that friction between sort of bottoms up and top down, Ellie, when you think about your role, how do we drive consistency and really amplify the messages we're trying to get across? Have you got any sort of, best practices or areas that you kind of work on to kind of try and sort of reduce that friction that we're seeing?
Yeah, look, and friction can be a good thing, right? That's cliche, healthy friction. And I don't think we want to remove that from our process. I think we want to embrace it as much as we can and think about how do we get to the best outcome again for our clients. And for us, with 70 plus countries, it's incredibly challenging to have a global program that's also locally relevant. So we work incredibly closely with our country business and function based cyber partners. We have a network of security champions, as I'm sure a lot of you do, around the globe. We do calls every 2 weeks with them. It's a big chunk of our time. Every 2 weeks, we hold multiple calls with our partners around the world, and we give them our kind of blueprint of what we're doing. So kind of central campaigns for that consistency, economies of scale, right? No one wants to be creating that at a country level based on all the policies and standards and control requirements. But then also from a country point of view, they might flag that perhaps there's a specific risk or threat that is facing them in their local landscape. Maybe it's a local country actor, or maybe it's a specific threat they're experiencing. And then we have to kind of adapt and tweak. So I think just constant engaging with the business, especially if you're a global firm, and even if you're not, at the federal or state level, just are you building content and campaigns, and are you building programs that are fit for purpose, that are addressing global policies and standards, because everything's based off the policies and standards. So yeah, I think just it all gets back down to conversation and making sure that we're not just making assumptions at the global level. So yeah, and that's something we have to just all keep ourselves honest about, isn't it?
Okay, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, Brendan spoke earlier about the skills shortage, right, in terms of the cyber industry in general. And, as we think about it, particularly in areas related to trust, digital data, I know this is an area which is sort of key to you as well. How important is our ability to build diversity in terms of really helping us not just develop, but actually attract resources and skills to this industry, do you think? Is there something we're missing here that we really need to focus on?
I mean, it's incredibly important. Everyone in the room knows that there is a massive cyber skills shortage. So we've got to do it. We've got to make it work. And we know that companies that, once you have built out your workforces, we know that companies that are more diverse, and that's everything. That's getting more women into cyber. That's getting more people, as Brendan mentioned, from very diverse backgrounds that don't necessarily think, cyber is a career path for me. We know that those organizations and government agencies that you've got in the room here, Matt, are going to be more productive. They're going to make better decisions. Their products are going to be better designed because they've got diverse engineering and development teams working on them. And all of us in the room have the tools to do that. That's the beauty. We all have the tools to do it. And whether it's launching apprenticeship program, which we've just announced in Stanchart, I'm sure a lot of you have apprenticeship programs. We're bringing in school leavers. As you say, no one joins as a CISO when they're 16 or 18. So we're bringing them in, we're circulating them around cyber, interns, graduates, all these kind of programs. We've got, like I'm sure most people in the room, you've probably got people on your teams that come from an incredible wealth of backgrounds. We've got lawyers, musicians, DevOps, people that have come from non-technical backgrounds, auditors. So we need to embrace that diversity, and it's on us as security leaders to show them what a career in cyber can look like. And we've got Cyber Academy in the bank I've just launched, where we show that people outside of cyber, whether they're data privacy, maybe they're in the business and they think, that looks pretty cool. So, go and look at our Foundation Academy, kind of the suck it and see, go and feel what a career in cyber might look like, serving up little learning interventions on network security or forensics or intel, and just kind of giving them a flavor of what that can look like. And we've just got to make it much more obvious that a cyber career can actually be for anybody. And a lot of our common skills are actually what we're missing is the problem solving, the ability to go into a business conversation and have a business level conversation and use business language and solving complex problems. These are all skills that we need across our cyber workforces. So yeah, we've just got to bring it to life for them, haven't we, I think?
Yeah, no, exactly. And Brendan, I guess thinking about that a little bit more, the need to, in many ways, sort of demystify security, right? And if you think about your organization, what do you do, or have you thought about how you can encourage existing employees in other areas to consider sort of developing their skills in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think, and seeking after diverse teams so we get innovative outcomes. I think it's very much about, lots of businesses already have a language of risk management for operational health and safety, for all the other things they do with risk. And a lot of times in cyber, I think we start from scratch and we start describing things in our own terms rather than actually using the frameworks our organizations already have. But if we use those organizations, those frameworks and the words and the language that are inside our organizations, like a point from the last talk, we actually can then start using the people in our organizations that don't do cybersecurity as their job, but they do something really closely related to risk. And that actually gives us a lot of diverse viewpoints. And I think through that you can drive diverse conversations without necessarily everyone being in the room being a cyber specialist. Then you also get like skill diversity, gender diversity, age diversity far more naturally for a lot more innovative outcomes just by plugging into those existing networks and using the languages that your organization already uses.
Fantastic. And so just to sort of wrap things up, I'll start with you, Brendan. You think about what's the one thing you'd like the team here to sort of take away, perhaps do differently or think about differently as they leave today's session?
I think set really big goals and ask yourself what we can do as an industry, not necessarily just what we can do ourselves for our organizations.
Okay, good point. Thank you very much. Ellie, and the last word from you before we go to the next session, please, in terms of what would you like the group to take away with them here today? Do you think the one or two things?
Yeah, so it's quick ones. The first one is we have a responsibility to build a more diverse workforce. We really do. So I just challenge all of you, promote, young women on potential rather than always looking at performance. Challenge your talent acquisition teams and your hiring agencies when you're getting a pile of the same old CVs. Challenge them and say, I want 50-50 men and women. Really be honest and rigorous about our development and our promotion techniques as well, because to Brendan's point, we can uncover a wealth of talent out there if we just opened our eyes a little bit and kind of thought, maybe somebody who doesn't look or sound like me could be great for the job. I just need to give them the chance. And I think the second one is just change the narrative. Let's go in there. Let's be a bit brave, a bit bold when we go and have meetings with our shareholders and our business partners and say, we're not just about managing risk and a control function. We can also innovate and add value to the business as well. And that's just going to have positive effects all around, I think. So that would be my top two. Okay, fantastic. Innovate and change the narrative. Ellie, Brendan, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk with you here today. We've got loads more to talk about, I know. But that was a really great conversation. I think lots of great value to the group here today. So thank you for joining us live from Singapore, Ellie. Hope to see you in person soon. And Brendan, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.